Welcome to the Containment Zone. Some anomalies conceal themselves, some wait in shadows or bury their patterns behind symbols, language, or rules. But not this one. This one spreads. Not through whispers, not through belief, but through flesh. SCP-610. Designation: the skin disease. Colloquial name within the Foundation: the flesh that hates. The first report came from the southern district of Krasnoyarsk Krai, Siberia. A Soviet outpost flagged for health quarantine. Standard protocol. No one expected more than a viral bloom, maybe radiation-induced mutation. What they found was not a virus, not a pathogen, not a chemical. It was a will, carried in skin, spoken through muscle, and shaped like everything you're afraid to become. Initial scouts reported seeing movement in the village ruins, not among survivors, but among structures. Walls were breathing, windows covered in layers of pulsing tissue, and from beneath the floorboards, the sound of footsteps, too wet to be human. No one was recovered from the first village, only growth. The area was classified under a zero-exit quarantine, a 50-kilometer radius established. All personnel entering the red zone were logged as unrecoverable. But the spread didn't stop. It adapted. And the Foundation was left with a single objective: not to contain it, but to outlast it. The first Foundation team entered the village of Oros on foot. Heavy suits, redundant filtration, burn-on-exit protocols. They didn't make it past the fifth structure. The outer buildings were covered in a reddish-brown growth, fibrous and warm to the touch. It had consumed walls, furniture, tools, but arranged them in ways that made sense only at first glance. Chairs stacked like ribs, door frames twisted like joints, windows stretched open like mouths. The air was thick, smelled of copper and something deeper, like breath soaked in blood. Inside the first home, they found movement. At the far end of the room, something shaped like a man stood still. The suit's thermal scanner showed body heat, but it was irregular, not pulsing from a heart, radiating from every inch of skin. The agent called out. The thing turned. It had no face, just a mask of stretched skin pulled tightly across the skull. Eyes sealed shut, lips overwritten with scar tissue. But it moved, jerkily, like a puppet that remembered being a person. It walked toward them without sound. The agent raised a weapon, fired once. The thing stumbled, and then began to grow. From the entry wound, new tissue spilled out. Fast, wet, alive. Tendrils pushed through the floorboards. Walls rippled. The ceiling began to sweat. Command ordered an immediate retreat. 3 of the team made it to the edge of the quarantine line. The 4th was pulled beneath the ground. His screams continued. For 13 minutes. By the time drones were deployed, his body was no longer visible, but something had taken his shape. It crawled out from the house he'd entered, larger, stiffer, and whispering, in a voice that only got louder when everyone went silent. Quarantine was reclassified, the region renamed, and the designation updated. SCP-610 is not a disease. It is a reconstruction. One that doesn't build with wood, stone, or steel, but with people who used to be something else. SCP-610 does not replicate through air, water, or direct contact in any way that aligns with modern epidemiology. It spreads through skin, not in the form of infection, but in the form of repurposing. Exposure is not required. Consent is not required. Only proximity. Once within range, the body begins to change. Muscle stretches, Bone liquefies and reforms. Facial features collapse into new geometry. The nervous system unthreads itself and reconnects into something that still responds to pain, but not to mercy. The process is not instantaneous. It can take minutes, sometimes hours, and during that time, the subject remains conscious, fully aware of their own disassembly. Internal surveillance footage captured one such transformation inside a collapsed chapel in Village Sector B. The victim was a researcher, young, still moving, still whispering to himself. Long after the vocal cords had dissolved, every inch of his body reshaped itself to resemble nearby structures. His torso widened, arms split into rib-like protrusions. Spinal column pushed through the back and fused to the wall behind him. He was no longer a man. He was part of the room, a load-bearing beam with a pulse. Even more disturbing was what came next. New growth began to spread from his tissue outward, weaving sinew across the walls. And at the center of that mass, something began to rise. Not born, not built, just formed. A figure, vaguely human, but with no recognizable biology, no organs, no breath, just motion. It turned its head toward the drone and smiled, with skin that was not its own. These constructs are not random. They follow patterns, build toward centralized masses, cores of neural density hidden deep in the structures. Some are stationary, others move, fast, but all of them obey a logic no human has deciphered. Not primal, not intelligent, intentional. They shape homes, halls, entire villages, and in the center of these nests are chambers, circular, open, filled with breathing walls, waiting for something else to arrive. The Foundation has theorized that SCP-610 is not merely creating biomass, but preparing infrastructure. It is building a new environment, one where the rules of anatomy and identity no longer apply. The Foundation originally believed SCP-610 was confined to the isolated villages near the Uaktau Mountains, a remote zone, low population density, easily walled off. But growth does not obey maps. Weeks after the initial outbreak, a reconnaissance team monitoring Zone B detected fluctuations in ground temperature nearly 12 kilometers outside the designated quarantine ring. A new mound had formed. Low, dome-shaped, covered in patchy grass. Harmless at first glance. Then it opened, not with force, but like lungs exhaling. A wet fissure split down the center, and from inside, a structure rose, not a building, a limb. Muscle coiled around a scaffold of bent rebar fused to the soil beneath. At the tip, fingers, still twitching. D-class reconnaissance units were dispatched to nearby settlements. The team entered a hydroelectric station located 18 kilometers from the quarantine line. No signs of conflict, no signs of struggle. But in the control room, a new panel had been installed, made of flesh and steel. Each key was a tooth, each dial a knuckle. The display pulsed, in rhythm, with the station's generator. The outpost had not been attacked. It had been assimilated. By day 3, the water tested from the reservoir showed trace amounts of organic material, not harmful, not even foreign to the region's biology, until it began reproducing itself inside the piping. SCP-610 does not invade. It infiltrates, quietly, relentlessly, through surfaces, pressure, and presence. And always, it arrives early, because by the time the Foundation detects a new growth site, the site itself is already infected. Not just physically, structurally. The layout changes, rooms shift, walls begin to soften, and in one documented case, a single maintenance tunnel bent inward, spontaneously reshaping itself into the curvature of a human spine. Attempts to purge secondary sites via incendiary strike have proven temporarily effective, but growth always returns, sometimes from the ashes, sometimes from underground, and once from inside the fire itself. Local wildlife exposed to ambient SCP-610 particles mutate within hours. Flies develop skin, birds molt into meat, worms coil into neural strands, then slither toward warmth, as if seeking home. One Foundation analyst described the phenomenon as not just infection, but rehearsal, as if the world is being practiced in another shape. The spread is not fast, but it is deliberate, and it is steady. It waits, it adjusts, and it builds, because SCP-610 doesn't want to conquer the world. It wants to replace it. SCP-610 does not initiate verbal contact. It does not scream. It does not beg, but it does respond. D-Class Subject 61-D6 was equipped with a full audio rig and instructed to approach one of the more developed infected compounds, a cluster of fused structures arranged into a spiral mound, rising 15 meters high. The air shifted as he entered. He described it as wet and listening. At the edge of the growth, he paused, said aloud, "Is anyone in there?" For a moment, nothing moved. Then, from inside the spiral, a figure emerged. It was human in shape, but its walk was all wrong, too slow, too fluid. Its arms swung like rope. Its head hung at a 90-degree tilt. It stopped just beyond reach, and from its chest, a second mouth opened. Not where a mouth should be, not made of teeth, just stretched muscle, wrapping itself into a crude spiral of sound. Then it spoke. "Still, you make more." The subject stepped back, asked, "What are you?" The mouth shifted again. "You are the wound. We are the scar." A static pulse overtook the audio feed. Cameras froze. By the time the signal returned, the subject was gone. In his place stood another figure, newly formed, still soft, still trembling. It wore a suit like his, but the skin beneath was already fusing into the fabric. Attempts to replicate communication failed. Every subject who spoke into the biomass was either absorbed or transformed. But the patterns continued. Movement always occurred in threes. One figure watches, one circles, one listens. Chambers in deep zones began to resemble organs, atriums of flesh that pulsed in sync with approaching footsteps. Passages narrowed as if inhaling. Lights flickered in response to questions, even when the words weren't spoken aloud. One researcher described the sensation as being heard through the skin. Drone footage captured a moment of spontaneous coordination. 12 infected figures surrounded a central structure, a crude tower of spinal cords and fused ribs. They moved in a synchronized rhythm, scraping the ground with their limbs in concentric patterns. Not randomly, deliberately. After 7 minutes, they stopped. The ground beneath them bulged, and from the soil rose a new chamber, fully formed, already breathing. This was not evolution, it was memory, repeated, refined, and perhaps meant to be seen. The Foundation has not confirmed intelligence, but SCP-610 exhibits behavior consistent with ritual, structure, and mimicry. It is not just reacting, it is responding, and whatever it's becoming may already know we're watching. At first, SCP-610 was classified as an infection, then a contaminant, then a biomass event. But after years of failed containment, repeated transformations, and increasingly structured growth, the classification changed again. Not a virus, not a creature, a purpose. Biological analysis reveals no clear point of origin, no patient zero, no matching DNA, just aggressive, coordinated replication. Samples from infected sites show patterns in the collagen formation. Tissue folds itself around hollow centers. These empty spaces mirror the size and shape of thoracic cavities, as if SCP-610 is attempting to rebuild bodies from memory, but not human memory, something older, deeper, encoded not in genes, but in behavior. One proposal, logged and sealed in Foundation Archive Theta Red, outlines a disturbing hypothesis. SCP-610 is not spreading to grow, it is spreading to return. Return to a form that predates modern biology, a flesh logic built before consciousness evolved, a version of life where identity was irrelevant and all forms were shared. In this framework, individuality is a defect, sensation is excess, and language is infection, which would make us the disease. This aligns with reports from deep drone missions into central hives. In one chamber, a series of bodies were arranged in near-perfect symmetry. Not alive, not dead, just posed. Each figure was flayed open, not violently, but surgically. And beneath their exposed tissue, stitched into muscle, were symbols, not words, shapes, repetitive loops, spirals, and knots that, when reconstructed digitally, form anatomical blueprints. Not for people, for structures. It wasn't harvesting, it was designing. And in the deepest zones of the infection, there are walls that pulse with a low, steady rhythm, a heartbeat, too slow for anything human, too ancient to have just begun. Foundation linguists have debated the phrase most commonly spoken by advanced infected forms. This is what we were. It could be memory, could be instruction, or a warning. But one possibility remains unspoken in the official reports, that SCP-610 isn't just building something, it's rebuilding something that once was and never meant to end. SCP-610 is still active, still spreading, still growing beneath frost-bitten soil and abandoned villages. There is no cure, no immunity, no containment method that works longer than the organism allows. And that's the part no one wants to say aloud. It allows. Because the flesh does not move constantly. It waits, it pulses, it listens. And when the sensors are off, when the perimeter drones fail, when the power flickers just long enough, it grows, not violently, not chaotically, but with direction. Because SCP-610 doesn't expand like an outbreak, it builds like it remembers how, and we don't know what happens when it's finished. What began as a containment file is now a doctrine of survival. The Foundation has chosen to isolate, not eliminate, to watch the flesh, to record it, to count the structures and measure the shapes and monitor the chambers filled with heartbeats that don't need bodies anymore. But containment isn't control, it's delay. One day, the structures will rise outside the zone. The growth will reach further than the red lines drawn on aging maps. And people won't see infection. They'll see walls, towers, homes, a world that looks familiar enough to enter. And when they do, they'll never leave. Because SCP-610 isn't trying to survive. It's trying to reclaim, to overwrite the anatomy of Earth, with a memory of flesh that existed before history. And all it asks in return is that we stop being ourselves. Thank you for reviewing another anomaly in the containment zone. If your skin feels warm after this recording, don't worry. That's how it starts. Not with pain, not with fear, but with the soft, gentle certainty that you've already been chosen.